Chapter 6. The wild geese flew out to a skerry to graze. Some gray geese they came across were very surprised to see their kinfolk so far out on the outskirts of the archipelago, for wild geese usually fly inland. A caw told them about Smirre the fox, and a wise old gray goose said, "It was a great misfortune for you that the fox was outlawed from his own territory. Now he will persecute you all the way up to Lapland. Take the outer route to Åland and stay there a few days so that Smirre loses track of you." A caw considered that good advice. None of them had ever been to Åland before, but the gray geese said that all they had to do was to fly south until they came to the great flight of birds. All birds heading for Finland and Russia rested in Åland, so there were plenty of signposts. It was as calm and warm as a summer day, grand weather for a sea journey. Beyond the islands, the sea spread out so mirror smooth, the boy thought the water had vanished. He had sky and clouds both above and below him when he first sat there. It felt as if he might fall in either direction. And it grew even worse when they reached the great flight of birds. Thousands of birds were flying as if along a staked-out route. Ducks, velvet scoters, guillemots, long-tailed ducks, grebes, shrieks, oyster catchers, and many, many more. The boy could see the whole procession of birds reflected in the water, but he was so dizzy he thought the birds were all flying belly upwards. The birds were also so tired they were quite silent, and that made everything unreal. Perhaps we're going all the way up to heaven, he thought, wondering what he would see there. Then there was a crackle of shots. Small white columns of smoke rising, and the sound of agitated birds calling out, "Guns! Guns in the boats! Fly high!" Oh no, they certainly weren't in heaven. A long line of boats full of marksmen lay down there, shot after shot echoing, and dark little bodies sinking down towards the sea. Cries of dismay rising from the others as they made their way up as fast as they could. The wild geese were safe, but the boy was dismayed. To think that anyone should want to shoot a caw and Ch6 and Coxie. People didn't know what they were doing. A faint wind with great masses of white smoke in it soon came towards them, billowing more and more thickly. The birds grew agitated, but it was a great wet fog enveloping them, so thick they couldn't see a goose length ahead of them. The other birds knew the way perfectly well, so started playing in the mist to lure each other astray. But they all knew where Åland was. It was much worse for the wild geese, and they were tricked over and over again until even a caw's head was whirling. "Where are you heading?" called a swan. "Come with me, I'll show you the right way." And after he had lured them far away from the others, he disappeared into the mist. "Can't you see you're flying upside down?" cried a duck, and the boy flung his arms around the gander's neck in terror. Then he heard a dull rumbling shot in the distance, and a caw at once stretched out her neck, flapped her wings hard, and set off at top speed. The old gray goose had told her that on the outermost point of the southern headland of Åland there was a cannon of people fired off at the fog. Now that a caw knew the direction, no one in the world could tempt her astray. On the southernmost tip of the island of Åland, there was a royal estate called Ottenby, a large estate that ran from shore to shore, with a long wall separating the land from the rest of the island. The estate had always been a refuge for huge numbers of creatures, and in the spring and late summer, thousands of migrating birds came down to rest on the marshy shores below the great meadow. When the wild geese had at last found their way to Åland, they also landed just there. The mist was still thick over the island, but the boy was astonished by all the birds he could distinguish on only one little stretch of the shore. Ducks and gray geese were grazing on the meadow, and divers were fishing in the sea. The liveliest movement out on the long seaweed beds were the birds crowded together to feed on larvae. The boy walked around, gazing at swans and sandpipers and shelducks. He had never been so close to them before. The next morning was just as misty. The boy walked along the edge of the shore, collecting mussels. Just as well to have some food with me, he thought. But he needed something to carry them in. So he found some old sedge grass, tough enough and strong enough to weave into a knapsack. That took him several hours, but then he was pleased with what he had done. At midday, all the geese came running up, crying, "The big white gander has vanished in the mist." The boy was terribly frightened. "Have you seen a fox or a man or anything else dangerous?" he asked them. No, they had seen nothing. The gander had probably got lost in the mist. The boy immediately set out to look for him. "Martin! Martin, where are you?" he called. He went on searching until darkness began to fall, but in vain. What would happen to him if he couldn't find Martin? No one in the world could replace his friend the gander. He walked miserably back across the meadow. But what was that white something appearing out of the mist but the gander? "I've been wandering around lost all day," he said apologetically. "Never leave me again, promise me," begged the boy, throwing his arms round Martin's neck. "No, never, I promise you," said the gander. But the next morning the geese came rushing over, calling out that he had gone again. He must have got lost in the mist like the last time. And again Nils set off, calling and searching, first along the shore and then inland right across to the windmills in the middle of the island, only to return in the evening, tired and worried. This time he could only think that his traveling companion was lost forever. Then he heard the rattle of a rock falling and thought he could make out something moving in a heap of stones. He crept nearer and saw the white gander laboriously climbing up a cairn of stones with a large bunch of root fibers in his beak. The boy didn't call out because he thought it would be good to find out first what had made the gander disappear in this way. A young gray goose cried out with delight when the gander appeared, and the boy crept even closer to see and hear better. The young goose had injured one wing and couldn't fly. Her flock had left her now, and she would certainly have died of starvation if the gander hadn't heard her faint cries and carried food to her. "Good night," said Martin. "I'll come again tomorrow. I won't be leaving for some time, and you'll soon be better." When the gander had gone, the boy crept up among the stones. He was certainly going to tell her that there was no question of Martin staying. But when he saw the gray goose, he understood his friend. She had the most beautiful little head imaginable. Her plumage was like silk, and her eyes gentle and pleading. "Don't be afraid of me," said the boy, when she tried to run away, although her left wing was out of joint and dragging along the ground. "I'm Tom Thumb, Martin's traveling companion." When the young goose heard this, she gracefully lowered her head and said in a beautiful, soft voice, "Then I'm glad you've come. The white gander has told me that no one is as wise and good as you are." He felt a great desire to help her, so he thrust his small hands in under her feathers and felt along the wing bone. Nothing was broken, but there was something wrong with the joint. He took a firm hold on the bone and pulled it back into place. The poor young goose let out a shrill cry and sank to the stones as if dead. The boy was terribly frightened. He had wanted to help her, and now she was dead. He ran away. To him, it was as if he had killed a person. The next morning, the mists had cleared, and Akka decided to move on. The boy was pleased because his conscience was troubling him. He had said nothing to the gander about what happened when he tried to cure the gray goose, but he wondered whether Martin would have the heart to leave her. The flock set off, and the great white gander reluctantly went with them. But he suddenly turned back, the thought of the young goose overwhelming him. The journey to Lapland would have to look after itself. He couldn't go with the rest of them while she was lying sick and alone, perhaps starving to death. With a few wing beats, Martin was there by the pile of stones, but there was no gray goose lying among them. "Dunfin! Dunfin, where are you?" called the gander anxiously. Nils thought perhaps a fox had been and taken her. But at that moment he heard a beautiful voice answering the gander. "Here I am, here I am. I was just taking my morning bath." And out of the water came the little gray goose, quite well and in good condition. She told the gander that Tom Thumb had made her wing better, and now she was ready to go with them on the journey. Drops of water lay like splashes of pearls on her silky, shimmering feathers, and Nils thought that she looked like a real little princess.